My name is Donbi. My opponent's claim was that the legalization of prostitution would strengthen American society. Her three secondary claims were that, firstly, legalizing prostitution would lower the amount of sex trafficking in the U.S. Secondly, her second claim was that the legalization of prostitution would decrease the percentage of sexually transmitted diseases among the residents of the U.S. And thirdly, was that legalized prostitution would reduce sex crimes and violence. I claim that legalizing prostitution would jeopardize America's safety. My response to her first supporting claim that legalizing prostitution would lower the amount of sex trafficking in the U.S. is that I claim that it would actually increase sex trafficking. The main evidence for her claim was the example of legalized prostitution in Germany in 2001, with sex trafficking decreasing by 10% within 10 years. However, Axel Dreher, a professor of international and development politics at the University of Heidelberg, used data from 150 countries to reach the conclusion that where prostitution is legal, there is more human trafficking than elsewhere. One of the reasons why the data provided to reach her conclusion that trafficking decreased by 10% in Germany due to legalization is incorrect is due to inaccurate statistics. Munich Police Chief Wilhelm Schmidbauer states that there is an explosive increase in human trafficking from Romania and Bulgaria, but that law officials lack access to the necessary tools to investigate. They have practically no cases involving human trafficking simply because they can't prove anything. This provides an alternate explanation for the decrease in sex trafficking statistic. According to one of the most widely read German language news websites, Spiegel Online, legalizing prostitution has actually increased the sexual exploitation of young women by providing incentive for immigrants from neighboring countries to find work in the sex industry. Manfred Paulos, a retired chief detective from the German city of Ulm, states that Germany has become a center for the sexual exploitation of young women from Eastern Europe, as well as a sphere of activity for organized crime groups from around the world. This suggests that the ideology of legalized prostitution has nothing to do with the reality, actually resulting in increased sex trafficking rates. Her second claim that the legalization of prostitution would decrease the percentage of STDs among residents of the U.S. is that she provides the statistic that 50% of prostitutes around the world have the HIV virus, and that 8 to 9% of people become infected through illegal prostitution, and that if it was legalized, STD rates would drop. However, according to the realistic Equal Active for Life's article on prostitution in Canada and other countries, in 1986, the Victorian Labour government, Victoria and Australia, legalized brothels, claiming that crime would be eliminated, prostitutes' lives would be made safer, and that there would be fewer health risks. None of this happened. STDs and AIDS actually increased. This was due to the fact that medical authorities examined only one of the partners in the sex act, which was self-defeating. Also, favorable medical results provided a false sense of security to clients, prostitutes, and controllers. Medical examinations also provoked hostility and decreased cooperation from prostitutes who moved around too often to be monitored. If one did become infected with the STD, another prostitute would replace her for the medical checkup using the infected woman's medical card. Legalized prostitution would provide a false sense of security, contributing to an increased amount of unprotected sex, which would then lead to an increase in STD rates. The third claim was that legalized prostitution would reduce sex crimes and violence. My response to that is that it is not the fear of being criminalized that prevents prostitutes from seeking help. It is the fear of retaliation from their pimps. She claims that sex workers would be more likely to seek help in case of sex crimes and violence instead of the fear of being criminalized. Her example was the case of New Zealand, where prostitution is legal, and police have greater success with prostitution abuse cases because prostitutes are less inhibited about speaking with officers. However, there is no evidence to support this claim at all. It was just a statement. According to personal testimony from Spiegel Online by a former German sex worker named Cora from Moldova, she was stabbed in the face by her pimp after refusing to work a 24-hour shift. Even after she managed to run away to Romania with some help, her pimp was able to call where she was staying and threatened to track her down personally. She didn't feel safe to seek help from the police then, although prostitution was legal in Germany where Cora was working. It had no positive bearing in preventing Cora from being a victim of sex crime and violence. According to a report by the Federal Criminal Police Office in Germany, there are many women whose situations suggest that they are the victims of human trafficking, but it is difficult to provide proof that would hold up in court. Everything depends on the woman's testimony or word of mouth, but there is little willingness to cooperate with the police and assistance agencies, especially in the case of presumed victims from Romania and Bulgaria. And when women do dare to say something, their statements are often just withdrawn. The fear of seeking help in the case of sex crime and violence was not diminished by the legalization of prostitution, therefore had no positive bearing in that situation. Legalizing prostitution in the U.S. would increase human trafficking, the rate of STDs and AIDS transmission, and do nothing to prevent sex crimes and violence, which would thereby jeopardize the safety of America.
Right, organizationally, everything's easy to follow, especially at the beginning. You preview things well. You've got a counterclaim that you are going to use on all of the secondary issues that you talk about, which makes it easy to figure out what your position is going to be on each of those points. I thought on the first point when you talked about trafficking that you had an excellent piece of information talking about general research around the world, and you have 150 countries, and then you go after the only example that the advocate talks about, which is Germany, and you've got 2 or 3 good arguments about why the German data can't be relied on and trusted, and in fact you've got evidence that suggests that in fact trafficking has increased in Germany, and that the conclusion that the advocate is using is completely wrong. So I thought that that was going after that point very directly. You did good research on that, and it's all very applicable to the issue that they talked about. On the issue of the second point, I thought again you had a clear label as we moved to that point. You've got a good explanation of what's going on there. I thought there was an excellent explanation of how this ends up happening when supposedly it's regulated, and that there are problems with that regulation. The statistical data on that particular point isn't as strong as it was on some of the other things that you were talking about, but the explanation, like I said, was clear, and it seems pretty reasonable. The other thing is that we didn't get much data from the advocate. I don't get any contrast to the advocate's evidence on this particular point, so this would be the one place where maybe there could be a little bit more analysis of what the advocate was talking about on their points. And on the third point, I thought that you did a pretty good job. You say that the on the sex crimes issue that the New Zealand case is just, there's no evidence on it. You challenge their data because it's just a claim. There's no source presented and that sort of thing. And then you've got a counterexample. I don't know how much we can infer from a single example there, but it's a pretty dramatic illustration that the source of the problem is not so much the customers, but it is the business itself. And if we've authorized the business to exist, how does that change the model? I think that's the question that you want to ask there. And I thought you did a good job kind of explaining why that model might not work very well. All right, thank you.